this slideshow? And where's my clicker? I haven't used this in a while. You know why we're here? There we go. So I'm actually a people photographer. So birds is secondary for me. So typically when I go to work, I used to do a lot more freelance photography, but I'm a lifelong tennis player. As Janice knows, we see each other when we go and play tennis. And I've been playing for almost 45 years, which means my body's been running around on concrete for way too long. And I had a couple of injuries, most notably slipped some discs in my neck when I forgot I wasn't 17. And yeah, and then so I kind of didn't really do a lot of photography for work. And I realized that if I didn't take on those jobs, I was going to heal quicker so that I could take more photos of birds. But when I do work, typically I'll be in a situation where I walk into a building and I have no idea what they're expecting from me. I've never been in the building before, and I'm expected to find photo ops. It doesn't matter what the light is. That's my problem, right? And so, you know, if I'm doing headshots that are in studio form, I can control that situation. I can control the light. I can control my camera. But typically, when I'm working, I do events. And so that means capturing moments as they happen. I can't tell Leon Dreisaitl that we were standing in the wrong spot. I have to get it right on the first time, but he is lovely, and I haven't actually asked him to move. So, you know, these are just kind of the things I do. I get one shot. And that's kind of like birds, you know, except for the birds might not after tell you that they didn't like their hair that day. So these are kind of my rules where I figure that this is where, like, anyone can improve, right? And I'm always improving, and you can't improve unless you're actually shooting. It takes a lot of practice to get used to flipping between these controls. But really, first and foremost, you have to have the right gear for the job. So I'm not going to show up where I'm going to be shooting indoors. I'm not going to show up with my birding lens. No, I'm going to show up with something that has a low f-stop. I'm going to have camera flash, you know, an external flash on me. I'm going to have two cameras that are set up for two different situations. I kind of have to have everything ready to go. So you need to show up with the right gear. Camera settings. This is where it can be a little murky because there's so many camera companies, but when I talk about the different camera settings, they're going to be broad so that you can apply to whatever kind of camera that you actually have, if that makes sense. Stability. This is where I think everyone can improve. Just because you can handhold doesn't mean you should. So you're making your camera work really, really hard if you're not stabilizing it somehow. And then, of course, there's always too much sun, not enough sun, sun in the wrong direction. There's lots of, you know, lots of problems with the sun. But when you practice in those environments, you know what to do with your camera or your body to give you a better shot at getting that shot. And then, of course, you're shooting for yourself unless someone's paying you for that photo. But they still hired you because they liked what you do with photos. Does that make sense? So you want to either have a photo that made you feel something. It was a memory of a trip or of a bird you saw that you've never seen before, or something that you witnessed that was so interesting. Or just if you say put it on your Instagram, how is that going to make people feel, right? You want like people to feel. So this is where there's some leeway. There's going to be great photos out there that are of a spectacular event that aren't tack sharp. That's okay, because you made people go, wow, that was quite a photo, right? And then editing, a little bit of editing goes a long way. So when we're talking about gear, there's a couple of things to think about. So over on the right, you can see prime. So that is a fixed focal length lens. For the last few years, I've used a prime lens in my yard. I've used a 500 millimeter. And I love that lens. I'm really, really happy with it. But what I found after a few years was that, and I used to have a zoom lens before that, I had a 200 to 500. But what I found was that the birds are coming a little closer, and all of a sudden, a lot of my photos were bird. And you know, there wasn't a lot of artistic expression, there wasn't a lot of context unless they were a bit farther away from me. And then I was getting into some situations where the bird was so close I couldn't actually fit it in my frame. So I actually just picked up, not even a month ago, I didn't get rid of my 500 prime, but I went back to a zoom because that's going to give me more like ability to capture multiple birds, you know, interacting with each other in one spot. When birds are closer to me, it's going to allow me to capture the birds close. And then this one has a little bit more reach. It goes to 600. So it was a little bit more than my prime lens. So some of those birds where, you know, because there's going to be different photos in your yard. There's going to be the, oh, I'm going to frame this and put this on my wall. And there's the other one is, that's proof that bird came and that's all it's going to be, right? And so we want to be able to prepare ourselves to make the most of those kinds of situations too. So I would say, depending on the size of your yard, a zoom lens is going to be the way to go because it's going to give you choice. It's going to allow you to be more creative. It's going to allow you to catch multiple birds doing their thing together. A prime lens, if you went something smaller, like a 300 millimeter prime, that might work in your yard too. But you're going to have to move to be able to frame that scenario differently. So I would still say that when you're yard birding, when you're taking pictures in your yard, a zoom lens is going to give you the most flexibility, and it's going to give, sorry, yes, Charlotte?
No, I was just going to ask, is it a 200 to 600?
This is a 180 to 600.
Okay.
And yeah, and it's a newer Nikon lens. I shoot Nikon, I always have. Well, except for like way back. I love Nikon. I'm using a Z8 camera. You don't have to have a Z8 camera to take great bird photos. I have a Z8 camera because I'm a working photographer. Do you know what I mean? Like, and I only switched from my D850, which I love, because I was put in some situations where it was much more beneficial to shoot silently with a mirrorless camera and have no shutter sound at all, like a live performance, right? Where they have quiet spots, not, you know, a rock concert. So when you have a decent camera, right, you can put better glass on it. So if you have the choice to spend more money on a camera or a lens, you'd actually pick the lens, as long as your camera can handle it. So this is kind of the balance that you have to go for. So the glass is where you're really going to see the quality of the photo. And really, when you upgrade a camera, it's because it's not, the one you have isn't doing something that you want it to do anymore. So in my case, I really, I was getting to the point that my shutter was going to go. And so I was either going to have to send it away and replace the shutter, or it was going to be time to move to mirrorless, and I chose to move to mirrorless. But the prime that I use, I just use an adapter, and I still use my prime lens and some of my other prime lens that I have for work too. And then this new one is a mirrorless lens. So that was where you can make choices, but informed choices, right? And so when we're talking about memory cards, this is an area that a lot of people don't realize the effect a memory card has on a camera. So if you have like I don't want to say inexpensive, but typically it'll be like more inexpensive card that's older, it's not very fast. That means when you're taking pictures, as you're taking pictures, they're not all writing to the memory card. So you're missing shots. So if your camera says it shoots like 50 frames per second, if you're using a super old memory card that's not very fast, you're not getting that. And that's the difference between maybe a bird having its eyes open or closed, right? And so if you want to maximize how many shots per second you can get, you want to have a fast memory card. So the one that's there is a 128 gigabyte, which is quite big. You might not need that much if you're really only birding in short bursts. I like to err on the side of caution and have a little bit extra. But here's something that a lot of people don't know. A lot of cameras have 2 slots. And in my case, mine is one kind in the main slot. It's a bigger, it's called a Type B card in the main slot. And then there's an SD card slot right underneath it. If you have a second card just sitting in there, it actually slows down your first card. So you want to keep that empty unless, I don't shoot weddings. I've shot a couple weddings. Weddings aren't my thing. I don't appreciate the fine expenditures. I guess I'm too frugal for that. And so I kind of steer clear of weddings. But But if I'm shooting a wedding ceremony, yes, I'm going to have 2 cards in there. Because you can't miss anything, right? That just can't happen. The chance of something happening is slim to none, but still, it's someone else's wedding, right? And so I would have it in there, and also you're not shooting a bird where you're going to actually need to be cranking out as many frames per second as possible. You still want to get a lot, but it's not the same as wildlife or sports photography. So you can get away with having a second card sitting in there as an emergency backup. But if you're shooting birds, if you're shooting birds in your yard, keep that second slot empty. So, of course, when we're talking about zoom, that's going to be for wildlife. We're talking more like birds, and we're talking mammals. But for insects, here's the thing. Some insects will sit still. Some absolutely, you look at them the wrong way and they're gone. So that one, you would actually want to use a long lens. But a macro lens, the difference is, for a macro lens, it lets you, if the bug is here, it lets you get right up to the bug and still be able to focus. If you've ever been too close to something with your long lens, you know you can't actually take the picture because you can't focus anymore. So that's what a macro lens is going to allow you to do. I do have a macro lens. Typically, end of June is not very busy in my yard, and I take almost all of my insect photography in that period to kind of fill that time. So I do have a macro lens on, but if birds start showing up, the macro lens is sitting there ready to go. But I have the long lens on because I know if I see something that's sitting on a leaf and it's not going to move, I have enough time to huff it into the house, switch that lens, get the flash on, run back outside, and the bug is not going to move. So this is when you have to kind of know your subject a little bit. But things like butterflies, no, that's going to be way easier with a long lens. Moths, don't even look at a moth the wrong way because they will be gone. So these are long lens things. Macros like flies, spiders, you know, that sort of thing, they're going to sit still for you. But if you're going to use a macro lens, that is when you really have to change your settings and you're going to need to bring some light with you, which is a flash. So macro is kind of its own beast. And so there's a difference between macro photography and up-close photography. So up-close is be like you're still getting a lot of those details and you've really zoomed in on the insect, but it's not technically macro, so it's called up-close photography. And then I've got teleconverter down there. I really don't like teleconverters. I think it really compromises the quality of photos. In a yard, you absolutely would not need a teleconverter. If you've got a shorter prime lens, that you might want to be going and looking for shorter owls one day, a teleconverter might help you if it's really bright outside. But as soon as it gets darker, it's just going to make it harder for you to get a good photo. It's better to take it with your lens without it and crop the photo at the end. Okay, so there's lots. We're going to talk about lots of things. So just an example of, so this Wilson's warbler, this is an uncropped photo. And you can see if this had been a robin, a blue jay, it wouldn't even have really fit in the frame. I would not have been able to take that photo. Now, here, with the Wilson's warbler, now we've got some context. I can see more of its perch, I can see a bit more of its background. It's a little bit easier to appreciate its expression. So this is just some of the things that artistically can be a little bit different. Now, if you have a prime lens and they're landing farther away from you, it's a lot easier to create that scene. But in a yard, that tends to be closer. So there's not quite enough room to do that. So when we're setting up our camera, there's some great videos online, and they're going to differ a little bit, but you would Google something like setting up your camera for bird photography. There is a ton of videos to go through every single little setting, every little additional function button. But I'm just going to simplify it because I want to think of it more of as a philosophy, because this is going to be something that's going to be easier for you to apply. So the main settings that I'm going to talk about are the types of focus, using the subject finder. So there's shots fired per second. We talked about that a little bit. The lens settings, because some lenses also have settings on the lenses that you can change. The ISO, the f-stop, and the shutter speed. So this is what we're gonna go through, because there's a lot of other little settings in there that are going to shortcut, you know, to have double function buttons and stuff like that. That's when I say look at a Google video, Google video on YouTube, go through, try those settings, see what you think. Spot focus. I sit on spot focus all the time. And this is why. So you can see for this great horned owl, if I didn't have spot focus, it's going to be incredibly sharp to get a sharp eye with all of the branches in front of it and around it. So I stick to that spot focus because typically when we see a photo and we think, oh, that's sharp, what we're actually noticing is the eye. So there could be blur from the wings and that kind of stuff, but if the eye is sharp, that is what we like really gravitate to, and especially for pictures of people, right? But it's the same with birds. So when we see that really sharp eye, we kind of forget that its other feathers aren't really in focus, right? We're really just drawn into that sharpness. So I stick to spot focus, and that doesn't mean you can't use it when you have multiple subjects. Here's the thing. I do love my nuthatch. Listen, red-breasted nuthatches are my favorite bird. So when you have two subjects that are close together, that spot focus is actually going to grab the eyes of both, even though you can see the spot focus is just on one bird. But then when you get down and they get farther apart, it's the same if you're taking a picture of two people standing far apart. It's how our eyes work. So if you're looking at something really close to you, everything around it is blurry, right? If you have two people and you're staring straight ahead at something else, both of those people are blurry. So our eyes work, our cameras work like our eyes do. So the farther away your subject is, the key for that is you actually zoom out. So that, and then you crop after, because you want to get the sharpness first. So instead of trying to zoom in to fill the frame, that makes it harder for those focus spots to grab the eyes. So pull back a little bit. That's where, again, zoom lens is going to be super helpful. Pull back a little bit. Let it lock its focus. Take its picture. Crop later.
Is the baby the one on the right?
Yes.
Because it looks so much like more...
It's pretty full. It's fully baked. Yeah, this is
the
a
one
fully...
on the left looks like really like, I don't know, like not a lot of feathers.
She's worn out. That poor mother has been working so hard. You know what? June, when school's ending, this is me, the mother. I am worn out and my feathers are missing. But yeah, you can usually tell when it's a juvenile, when it's June and they look fresh, and they still have a bit of a yellow gape around their beak. But yeah, the worn ones are the adults and the fresh ones are the juveniles. If anyone's shooting with older Nikon, like a D850 or D500, see this focus square? I miss this. This is group focus. I don't know if Sony or Canon have that, but they took this away for the Z8, and I opened up my camera and I cried because this was like, you could take a group picture of 60 people without even blinking an eye and they would all be sharp in focus. It just made it really easy, and you know, they say there's some replacements and we'll talk to the next one, but I just felt like this one was like 100%. So if you've got group focus on your camera, that's a great one to use when you have multiple birds. I sadly do not have that option anymore. But what I do have is like area focus. So there's going to be like a bigger square, and you can usually manipulate the size of it, and it's going to be searching inside of that for your eyeballs, basically. And that's a really good one if you've got like quite a large group of things, maybe a flock of waxwings, and you want to grab as many of them that are moving. You could use also something like a 3D focus. They're going to be called different things on different cameras, but the idea is it's an area, and it's looking inside that area. And so my darling Pretzel, as I named her, had 8 babies, and this is something that I would use for that. But now, of course, you need to have time to flip around with these different focus settings. So you can do some shortcuts on your camera to make it easier. But this scenario is a little bit more rare in a yard because you're typically not going to have a group of animals, right? And even a flock of waxwings are going to be quite a bit closer. So even just sticking on that spot focus, the birds are going to be closer together. It's going to be easier. This was me sitting down in an alley, so I had time.
Weren't you worried that they'd spray?
No, I'm fairly non-threatening. No, I just sat down quietly And I'd already been talking to her for a month or so. She would come in the yard and I'd say, oh, no, pretzel, not right now. And she would just scuttle away under the deck. So she was pretty used to us. And, you know, like any animal, when they're going to use their defense mechanism, it's because they feel threatened. And so I just sat down really still. I brought my camera up very slowly. I didn't move. You know, I didn't really talk. Luckily, no cars drove by. There was lots of different things. I didn't get very close because I was using a longer lens, right? So, you know, there's lots of things that you can do. But yeah, we're going to get to the specific groups, like some tips to get photos of them when we get a little farther down the slides.
How do you adjust your shutter speed to get the wings so they're sitting straight?
Oh yes, that slide is coming. Spray and pray.
Okay.
Spray and pray, but it's coming. It's coming. So this is a hummingbird clearwing moth, which I had a couple of really good visits this year, so I had some really good opportunities to get their photo. But this is when we're talking about continuous autofocus. So we do have different settings on our camera that's for a stationary subject, but you wouldn't really use that because you don't know when that bird, animal, or insect is going to actually move. Just when you're shooting wildlife and I start keeping on the continuous, if I was shooting headshots in a studio, then I change it. But otherwise, it's always, because you have to expect the unexpected, right? And so this is going to not slow you down by having it ready to go. Here we go, burst, spray and pray. So this is another thing. I'm always surprised if I'm like birding with someone and I can hear their shutter and I hear a little, and then another little. I'm like, no. You have to take, if you want a picture where there's not a little piece of snow covering the eye while it's holding that, while there's not something else happening, you need to take a ton of photos. So take more photos because that's when you're going to grab that second of, you know, something not being obscured. The bird is going to have its eyes fully open instead of partially closed. All these little details that take like the photo from like the mid-level to all of a sudden a wow photo. And so, you know, there's other photos in this series too, where then, you know, it was the perfect time where the berry was chucked up into the air before it swallowed it whole. But you have to take a lot of photos. So you have to set your burst on not necessarily the maximum. I don't have time to edit 9,000 videos of photos of a Bohemian waxwing, but you need to have enough that you're going to catch the second that you're hoping for. And then that goes back to the memory card, right? So if your memory card's not fast enough, you're going to be missing those anyway. So you've got to get a good memory card. And then on the lenses, not all lenses have settings on them. A common one would be sport mode. So sport mode, think about if you're moving around a lot, not if your subject is moving around a lot, it's you moving. So it's going to be giving the camera a little bit of a oomph to help stabilize your shots. And so you have to play around with this setting because it's actually like when they're saying like movement, they're really talking about the person moving. So you might find that if you have it on sport mode, that it's softening your photos a little bit. So you definitely want to experiment with the two modes, just regular and sport mode, to see like which one has the look that you're looking for. And so this is something that it's always going to come down to experimentation. And then there's another one on it that's it's like usually like an 8 meters to like a little infinity symbol. So that's kind of thinking if there was, okay, it's people. So all of you people here, but you in the second last row, I would like your photo. I want it to ignore everything in front of me. It's not going to focus on anything closer than that 8 meters, and then it's going to focus on forever. But in a yard, a lot of things will unexpectedly come close, and you want to be ready for that. So I do not use that setting so that I'm ready. There might be branches and things in the way. The spot focus will help you shoot through that, okay? If you have it on, you know, one of those everywhere and everywhere focus point things, it's gonna start grabbing, you know, leaves and branches and stuff that's interrupting your path. So spot focus is gonna help instead. And then there's autofocus, manual focus button usually on the lens. When you keep it on that, this is a golden tip I'm going to give you. So this is really important. This is going to be a show of hands. Is anyone using a mirrorless camera, and sometimes you go to take a picture and it doesn't focus on the bird that's right in front of you? Has that ever happened to anyone? Yeah? Okay. Use your manual focus ring. So if you've got it and it's bouncing around and you're like, it's right there, why isn't it focusing? Just give your manual focusing a little nudge. It'll knock it into focus. Go back to your autofocus button. So just be ready, like if you're struggling to find the bird, use the manual focus ring. Still set on autofocus, but you're just temporarily overriding it. That's going to grab your focus, and you're going to be able to, and then the autofocus will be set, and you'll be golden after that. But that's a really good one to remember. ISO. Okay, so different things let light into our photo. So when we're talking about ISO, kind of think about it's like if someone took like a paintbrush, whole photo is now brighter, right? But the more ISO that you bring in, the more light that you artificially create in that, also means your photo's probably going to get grainier. So it's kind of this balancing act that you're trying to get the shot, but you also don't want it to be so grainy that it looks so fuzzy, right? So ISO is kind of like blanket, the whole scene, including the subject, is going to get brighter. But when you think is f-stop, this is another thing that's going to make grain. So you're going to be going a higher f number to pull in more focus around. So you have a group, right? Or you want not just really the eye predominantly in focus, you would like to see more of the feathers, the feet really, really sharp. You're going to start bringing that f-stop up higher. That takes away your light. It pushes up the grain. So our modern cameras and lenses are really good wide open. So if it's a 5.6 lens, you shoot wide open. I shoot wide open all the time. And you'll typically be fine. And then you don't have to worry about adding grain that wasn't there that you might need to fix editing later. So if you want more F, if you want more focus, then that also means you might have to lower your shutter speed, which might make your picture not sharp, right? Motion blur. So there's give and take. So this is where the practice, and February, this is the time to practice. Go find a bunch of house sparrows and take a zillion pictures of house sparrows. Try out some different settings. This is when you get good at maneuvering around your camera. So you can give and take, and sometimes you get a ton of light, but birds can be kind of nasty that way sometimes, skulking down in the shade. So then you have to make some adjustments. Now, when we talk about ISO kind of blanket bringing in all the light, shutter speed does a little bit, it's a little bit differently for how you look at it. It's going to put a little bit more light, more so on the subject. So if you look at photos later, you can see that by lowering the shutter speed, but that is when the stability becomes key, because there's only so low you can go, only so open your shutter can be without motion blur happening. So it could be harder to get a sharp photo. It might be one of those photos that it's a record photo that you just want proof, and that's okay. And if you're dropping your shutter speed, that's when the stability becomes even more important. Stability. Oh, yes.
What mode would you use then in your backyard? Typically, would you have your camera on an automatic or?
I would shoot in manual mode. That's not for everyone, but I'm used to not thinking and flipping between. If you haven't tried shooting on manual mode before, again, this is a great time of year to do it. It does give you more control over a situation where your camera, if you were in auto, might say, oh no, this is better, but you can actually tweak it a bit in manual and get a better shot by, listening to yourself instead of the camera. Manual mode isn't for everyone though, so you can have some things like auto ISO, so it's not fully automatic, or you can have the aperture on auto as well. But if you haven't tried manual, just give it a try. It's February. Give it a try. Yes.
So to make the picture pictures like so nice with like the sharp, crisp word and then that like nice blurry background. Is that when you're like adjusting the aperture that you?
So this is, again, it comes down to spot focus. So spot focus is the spot that you want your photo of, and then the rest is kind of obliterated. This is also going to be the quality of your lens, right? And so what you want, the background, that blurs bokeh. So we want some nice, smooth, buttery bokeh. And you can get that a couple different ways because it also depends what's in your background. And I'm going to talk about that too. That's why I have my little prop here. But we are going to talk about that too to see how we can set it up. But for stability wise, I brought my monopod. I didn't bring my whole camera and my lens because it's easier somewhat to do that with slides than not everyone would be able to see my camera settings from in here anyway. All right, so monopod. I use my monopod all the time. I use my monopod when I'm sitting down in my chair. And this also is really good for the slip discs in my neck. So I highly encourage you to do that. So now here is my visual representation of how I use my monopod. So if I was standing up, yeah, it's a regular monopod. You don't have to spend a ton of money on a monopod. So this monopod was actually $40. The difference is the head that's on top of it. So I can use this when I'm standing. It's going to give me great stability, not only for photos, but for video especially. And I do like to take quite a bit of videos. So if I'm standing up and I see something, okay, great, I'm still going to use my monopod. I've got this little quick release here so that there's a piece on the bottom of my camera, and it just slides in and I tighten it up, and it's ready to go. So when I'm in my chair, the reason I picked this monopod, some of you are taller than me. Oh. And I can't actually use some of that. Like I have a hiking monopod that's much more expensive and very, very lightweight. But you can see when I'm sitting down in a chair, I can adjust this to be perfectly looking out of my chair and be stable. When I'm down on the ground looking at insects, I can sit down on the ground and still use my monopod. So these are really important things to consider, that how are you going to get that stability? Okay, you saw something amazing, you ran outside, you don't have your monopod, you just grabbed your camera and ran. I use my knee. I lean on a plant pot, like anything to get stability. And so if you're out and you're on a hike, there's a railing, use the railing. Stability is the key to sharper photos. Don't make your camera work so hard. But where you would spend more money is on, oh, can I get it off? It's been on here a long time. Oh, I can't. Okay, so this is a ball head. And the reason why this costs more is because it moves in all directions. A lot of monopods, or a lot of ball heads, are just going to actually sit on top of the monopod and not move at all. Some are just going to move back and forth, and some just side to side. But when you have the ball head, you can go up, all the way down, side to side, and it's really easy to maneuver. So don't spend all your money on the stick. Spend it instead on a ball head that's actually going to move like wildlife does, which is everywhere, and often where you don't want it to be.
Listen, will that little ball head handle that bigger lens yours?
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. And so when you're attaching, that's actually a great segue to something that I'm going to put on the slide. When you're attaching these big lenses and these cameras, you don't actually attach the camera to this, because that puts then all of the weight of the lens hanging in limbo, and that will affect your connection over time. So what you want to do is, there's an arm that comes out of the lens, you attach it to that, and because the lens is heavier than the camera, so that's where you want the weight supported, okay? So, and this will make your gear not have unexpected expenses come up. But for stability, the reason I could get this shot, even though it was in motion, this shot was actually in full shade. So I had to drop my shutter down as low as I could possibly go, and because I didn't want to have my ISO up so high, So those are the sacrifices, and also experiment. If you have a subject that's sticking around, try with both, right? Try with more ISO and keeping that shutter speed. Try dropping your shutter speed. If you have a subject that's game, that's practice time. Try some different things and experiment and see when you look at it later, well, what did you like best? So you versus the sun. Birds, they skulk often. You know, the first thing is, if you're shooting into the sun, the first question you're going to ask yourself is, can you move? Can you even change slightly? Even sometimes a few feet gives a different angle that will make the light better for your photo. If you're shooting something like insects using a macro lens, to get the kind of details. Now, typically when we see a lot of macro photos, they're actually heavily edited. You know, and they focus stacked and taken picture on top of picture on top of picture so that it's sharp throughout. Because a macro lens still works like our eyeball does. Like we're looking at it and the things behind it are still going to be blurry. So by putting our f-stop way, way up, so when I'm shooting macro, I'm shooting at like f14. So you need to have a flash with a diffuser so it's not paparazzi on it to be able to soften that look a little bit. And then now, when you have a flash on your camera, your shutter speed's very low. It's typically about 200. So this is where, because there's so much f-stop, so much focus, so much additional light, you're still getting a sharp photo. Typically for macro, I use manual focus on the subjects that will mainly sit still. Now, when you're using the sun, you've probably seen this before. If you're shooting and the sun is in front of you, your subject looks dark. Even when you're birding and you're looking up into the tree and the sun is behind it, it's kind of hard to pick up those details when you're looking. You're like, ooh, is that what kind of bird is that? You know, it's harder to tell. So your camera's having that same struggle. Can you move? Sometimes in a yard, we actually have a choice. So I have a spot where I sit in the morning where the sun is going to be coming from behind me. And then I have an evening spot, which I don't get as much time with, but I have a spot, and that one, the sun is coming from the other direction. Of course, I have a totally different, you know, palette to work from. I'm not looking at the same things, but at least that light, I have two choices, morning and evening. Now, when you're shooting insects, what can happen sometimes is that the insect is going to be very in focus, especially if you're using like a long lens, and that what it's on, the flower, whatever, may not be quite so in focus, and that's more f-stop. Oh, sorry. Okay, Shooting the Sun. Does anyone know the song? Am I along here? You drop it like it's hot. So really when you're shooting to the sun and you have no other choice and you need this photo, I mean, sometimes I'm just gonna walk away. Like if it's a bird that I have a zillion photos of that, you know, is not gonna be some rarity and I'm probably gonna see tomorrow under better conditions, if you drop that shutter speed and let your shutter stay open longer, you're going to have more of that light on your subject, which also brings in, I've already sent in my slides, so I thought of it later and I couldn't add it in, but when you're doing your metering, just like the focus I prefer, you're going to want spot metering. That's going to be assessing that spot you're putting it on for the best exposure. So if that's something to look at when you go home. It's like, oh, what's my metering set at? Spot metering is going to be best for wildlife, in my opinion. And of course, all of this is my opinion, right? Some of it you might say, well, that didn't work for me. That's totally okay. Photography is a creative art. And you know, sometimes to get the looks of different kind of photos, it's being creative with our settings and how we've set up this shot. Okay, and photos with feels. So there's some forgiveness with photos when there's something happening that you're going to catch, and it's not going to be always your perfect photo, but you're still going to love it because it made you feel something. So this little chickadee, he lost his tail feathers quite late in the season, and I named him Buttless. And I was so excited that little Buttless was like gathering nesting material. I'm like, where are you going to nest, my little friend? And so, you know, it was great because the things were working in my favor. I had some light, he was quite busy. He gave me lots of chances to get his photo. So that, happy ending, it works out. Then we have the barred owl that came in, is eating one of my northern flying squirrels. So this night was -30. I've been sitting watching it through my patio door for almost 8 hours, waiting for it to move. And it didn't until a flying squirrel flew into the yard and hit one of the elms. And after no movement all day, it just puffed up, flew around, grabbed the squirrel, landed back in the elm like split second, and started eating it. Now it's pitch dark. I mean, I don't even know what time, like this was January, so it's not like that late at night, but it's pitch dark. So I had to shoot this blind. It was manual focus, and I had a little flashlight, and that was it. And I got a shot. Well, I cut off some of its wing. The color is not up to my regular standard. But I love this photo because it was such a moment, and I've been waiting 8 hours for the owl to move. So obviously it has made me feel something. And then, we've just got little silly shots, like the black and white warbler just decided to keep going upside down. They're very, very nuthatch-like, but I really hadn't seen them do that before. Just like, watching downy woodpecker drink out of the hummingbird feeder. I'd heard that they do that. I'd never seen it before. And then, we've got situations where something happens really unexpectedly, like a raven coming down and eating a crow baby on my neighbor's lawn. And I was like, wow, that's gruesome. Also, can I take enough pictures of this? And so when you apply some of the things that kind of help you have a better photo, I knew what to do. And the biggest thing was, for where they were, it was me not standing up. I sat down on the sidewalk to get on that same level with the bird. So I had no control, really close by. I had to crop this kind of close because there was like a line from a sign, and there was something on their lawn, and it was very busy, right? So I did the best I could, but I was like, that was a crazy day, let me tell you. And then so we get to editing. So typically people feel like editing is kind of a bad word. It's not, unless you're doing this to your bird photos. Although I think it's kind of cute. But when you're editing, it's supposed to be a light touch. It's supposed to be kind of how your eyes saw it that day, right? Maybe the light was a little low, maybe it was a little bit orangey, but when you took the picture, those elements that, kind of made it feel magical kind of went away. So editing is going to be where you're making it look like how you felt it looked when you took the picture. Does that make sense? And so when you're editing, I see it sometimes people put as shot on their camera. And I'm like, hey, when we were still using film, we still used a darkroom. Lots of editing happened in there, and that's why, kind of the industry standard digital version is called Lightroom. Photos are meant to be edited in a way. But so when we're editing, just like on the top where it says, basic, kind of basic. There's a lot of things you can do, but I'm sure some of you have looked at a photo and they're like, ooh, they went a little overboard with that slider. And so you want it to kind of have still a nice natural feel. And this is when RAW versus JPEG comes in. And there's no right answer for this because, so if you're shooting RAW, the files are gigantic. And you need to have a computer that's going to handle you uploading those photos. You need to have a memory card that's going to be able to write those RAW files to your camera. So you need to be able to set up to shoot RAW. Now, the difference is RAW is really untouched, okay? When you shoot JPEG, the camera does some compressing and kind of locks in some things that are really hard to change later. So when you shoot RAW, you have a lot more options if something didn't quite go your way. You're shooting in the shade. Why did that bird move? Oh my goodness, we're in direct sunlight now. If you're on RAW, you can fix that a lot more easily. If you're in JPEG, it's really hard to pull some of those colors back. But you don't have to. And then there's a lot of situations where people would never shoot RAW. I mean, if I'm shooting a ballet show and I'm literally taking 3,500 pictures of dancers in a span of 5 hours, I am not shooting raw. I mean, how many memory cards do you think I have? And how many batteries do you think I have? It's, you know, it's a ton of work. So there's some situations, especially sports, and now also, if you have some pretty good conditions, and you know, it's quite consistent, shoot JPEG, right? It's like, there's no rule. I just tend to leave mine on RAW because I forked out the money for the computer that can handle it, so I have to make the most of it. So here's a little chickadee. This is just last week. And you can see by the sliders on the right, this is how I shot it. So this is a raw photo. This is how it came off my camera. And it's fine. You know, it's not bad, but you know, it was kind of, there was a shrub a little bit over top of it. The snow, like it's looking a little dingy, right, from the shadow. And I'm not really seeing its eye as well, especially when you have a bird with a black eye on black feathers. And then so just with a little bit of editing, just to brighten it up a little bit, just to make it less strenuous on the eye. Because sometimes you're like, you know, if a picture's a little bit too dark, too many shadows, you find yourself kind of leaning in, kind of squinting at it a bit. But as you can see from the sliders on the right, didn't really do too much. I'll talk about the sliders. So this is in Lightroom. There's lots of different editing programs out there. They all kind of have the same functions. And so what I found for this photo, the things that I touched, is I did adjust the temperature a little bit. This is where it's stylistic choices. I prefer a slightly warmer photo. I like things to look alive and lively, right? And so I tend to always add a little bit of that temperature in there to make it feel slightly warmer. And then especially for chickadees have like some really nice kind of you know, like buffy like sides, and so I like to bring that out a little bit too. Yes?
So did you use the slider for shadow and for exposure?
Yes, so you can see when there's like negative signs or plus signs, that means that they've moved from 0. So anything that's not 0 in the list after the temperature means that I adjusted it. So I made it a little bit brighter, but that made also everything a little bit brighter with the exposure, which made the snow a little bit, you know, I kind of was backing up a little bit from the screen. It was a little bit bright. And then so I just dropped the whites a little bit. I dropped the highlights a little bit, but not so much that now the snow is gonna look dirty. We still want it to, you know, not yellow snow either. We just want nice clean snow. Because it was in the shadows, I did lift the shadows a little bit, but whenever you have a bird or an animal that has black on it, when you start lifting up those shadows, it makes your blacks pale. So that's why I added a touch more black in, so that the parts of the bird that were black were now more to its original color. Does this make sense?
And then do you look at a histogram too when you're doing that?
No, I never look at the histogram actually. And I never look at it. I don't know why. I mean, like this, everyone is kind of different. Like some people, like there's different parts of programs that will like speak to them, and I like absolutely ignore it all the time.
So you just look at the bird.
I just look at it and I'm like, I like that. Ooh, that's too much. I don't really like that. Sometimes I do 2 versions of a photo as well, where I can't really decide. I'll just save them as like black cat chickadee 020326A. And then the next one I'll adjust a little bit because I couldn't decide, and that one would be B. I'll look back on it months later, I'll be like, oh, yeah, no, I like B better. Well, why not? You're already there and like most of the work is done. Why not just do a couple adjustments and save it one more time, right? And sometimes the same even with cropping it, right? And then I didn't do anything with texture and clarity. Texture and clarity generally is just putting grain back in your photo, which is really helpful if you're shooting something in black and white, but typically wildlife photos are mostly in color, so it doesn't really apply. But dehaze is a really interesting one that kind of is married with contrast. So when you change the contrast, you're kind of making the subject like kind of pop out a little bit more. And it's same with dehaze, except for the dehaze actually changes the colors a little bit. So you have to be really light with that one, or else you're going to be inadvertently changing things a little bit too much. But how do we get the photos? Okay, so this is my deck. We built a really, really large deck before I was a gardener, before I knew birds would come to my yard. And so I have a very large container garden until this deck meets its natural demise. So this is mostly my view from my sit spot. So a sit spot is the same place where you're going to go. And the reason I chose here is because I can't see my whole yard, but I can see I can see more of my yard from here than anywhere else in my yard. And I can typically bird in the morning. The sun is behind me, so that also goes into play of where I'm going to sit. But the benefit is of a sit spot is that the wildlife gets used to you being there. So if you're always going to the same spot, especially your locals, they're like, oh yeah, she's here again, drinking her coffee, and hasn't she had enough? And so, I'm sure they're talking about me, but, when you can see a lot of stuff, you also, and I do this too, I sometimes have too much stuff, and then I'm like, what am I thinking? I gotta get rid of some of these pots. So you have to kind of adjust and play around with it, but you want to pick a spot that's comfortable, that's going to have good light for you at the time of day that you typically can be outside. I do have another spot that you can kind of see, oh, wait, I think I have I don't have my progressives in. I have ooh, there it is. This is a swing bench back here. So this is really great for me in the winter because it's never covered up. So this is where I would sit in the evening to look in the other direction because then the sun is going to be going in the other direction. But having a good spot to sit is, finding the right spot first. It also needs to be comfortable so that you can actually last a long time. So you want something that's comfortable. Now, don't laugh at me. I'm going to show you what I look like in my chair. This was just taken like 2 days ago. All right, so this is my new puppy, by the way. Her name is Churro. She's a delightful little Mexican pastry. I had to actually get a new chair because my chair had kind of a rounded bottom. There's no way she'd be able to sit beside me. And she's like on glue, like with me. And I typically bird it's like a hanging egg chair. And that's what I have, the cover. It keeps the wind out. I can close it up to keep it dry when I'm not using it. But I just ordered this camo stuff from Amazon. And it's just with like little Canadian Tire clips on my chair. And I just used scissors to cut it out. It's worked wonders and cheaper than dirt. And so when people come to my yard, they often sit in the blind. If we have company, I don't make them all sit in a blind. If it's birding company, we're in blinds. And but yeah, and because I had to change chairs kind of unexpectedly, I actually ordered this off Amazon. And the part that I was really excited about was that typically in the egg chair, I could just kind of turn with my feet and get more directions. This one's on a swivel. So I can actually turn all the way around and see even more than I did very quietly. So, these chairs are not for everyone. This one is in a swing, it's stable, so that helps too. But having something that you can attach a blind to, another great thing is like the swing bench that I have on the other side. Anything that has somewhere that you can attach something to create a blind. Because when you create a blind, the magpies always know when I'm in here. It's really funny. They come in and it's like they're going to land and then they're like, oh no. Because otherwise, if I'm not in it, it's closed and it's black. But as soon as they can see this, they veer away. But when you're in the blind, the birds that are a little bit more exotic, minus hummingbirds will come to you no matter what. They're going to come closer and stay longer. And especially when you've got a big camera and that you're moving around, that's actually kind of the intimidating part for them, not so much you just being there. So by covering a lot of that up, you will get to see more activity closer. So I'm going to talk a little bit about some specific scenarios, and I broke them into 3 groups: insects, mammals, birds. So we'll start with insects. So insects really, there's some that are going to sit still and some that are not, like I said. And so you just have to kind of practice to get used to which ones those are. But I can tell you right away, a butterfly is not going to let you come up with a small macro lens. And dragonflies, surprisingly, will let you get quite close, but not super, super close. But if we look at a picture up on the top left there with the black meadowhawk, what I did is, because I actually, when I saw it, I was standing up. But that gives this kind of trajectory, right? And that can work sometimes, but it's really interesting when you change that perspective. So instead I went down on my knees with my monopod to be able to get on the same level, the same height as the dragonfly. And that gives the photo a different kind of feel. With the scarlet malachite beetle on the top right, I wanted to show the yarrow that it was on as well. And so I was using the macro lens for that because it was a shorter lens, allowed me to stand over top and look straight down. Because with a macro lens, you can get quite close to them, right? You couldn't do that with a long lens, especially not at my height. But that just gives another perspective too. It also shows the environment, gives some context. Oh, they like yarrow? How interesting. Oh, no one can see this. There we go. And then down here we have an orb weaver. It's harder to tell on the screen, but you can actually see its web in between the goldenrod's little pieces. It's not open yet, but you can see the web when you're looking at the actual photo, not on a screen. So there's different ways that you can show insects. You can show them really, really close up and it's just insect. My preference is just to kind of show a little bit of context, a little bit of like, why were they here? What were they up to? But you can play around with insects different ways, especially the ones that are really going to hold still, like a ladybug. I didn't do it for this one, but I have done it before. Oh, actually, I did it with a tussock moth, and it was actually on a hummingbird feeder or it was on an oriole feeder, so it was bright orange. And ooh, bright orange can be a really hard picture to take a photo of when it's really bright out. So I actually just took a stick and I picked it up, and then I was like, oh wait, this doesn't work. And I had to call my middle child, Cooper, come hold the stick. So then I had to get Cooper a stick, and I was like, no, Cooper, turn, and then, you know, until I could get, I should put that picture in here, and until I could get the picture that I wanted, and then I put it exactly back where I found it. There is not very many subjects that you can, I guess, even ethically do that for. But, you know, those are some things. I did find an invasive slug this year. Has anyone ever seen a banana slug? Yes. So it wasn't a banana slug, but it was about this big, and it came with a plant I bought at just like a big box garden center, and I was so surprised. And that thing had a whole photo shoot on a stick. Every angle that you could think about, and then I killed it. But again, typically not what you're doing with your subjects. So insects can be really fun, but really change your body position. You know, move that little leaf out of the way to open up some more light. If you can get your macro lens in there, if you're into that, you don't have to have a macro lens to get, you know, a lot of shots. If you can, if you happen to have a flash on your camera already, try and use it. You'll be surprised how you can really change your settings and get more focus with that little bit of light. And, you know, and for the butterfly, who can remember what butterfly this is? It totally, like, has escaped me.
Tortoiseshell? It should.
It's the,
It's a spay area.
yeah, it is, and it's the one that I always get. So it's not the Atlantis, it's not the fertility, it's the...
Silver wing.
We'll come back to this. With my brain, let's move along. So the thing that I find for insects, though, that really is something that works is go to a hot spot and go there first and then wait. Don't go and interrupt the action all the time. So I have this native gooseberry shrub, and when it opens up in the spring, it has these teeny tiny, like minuscule little pink flowers, and when it opens, that's when all of the solitary bees that have been hibernating in my yard wake up. So if I sit beside this shrub, I'm going to see 5 or 6 species of solitary bees, and all I have to do is go and sit and wait. So I've got one of those, it's disgusting now, it's one of those garden kneeling pads that's been left outside for years. And so I always have one of those lying around, and I'll just go and sit beside it and wait, because there might not be anything when I get there right away. But I know if I wait a little bit that they're going to start coming back in once I've settled in and once they see that I'm not a threat. Now, a big thing about insects don't even bother when it's windy. They'll just like put it away. Go do something else. Go sew or something. But windy days and little insects are, it's futile. But also, when it's sunny, there's going to be a lot more insect activity. If it's shady, it's going to be really quiet. So the days that you feel like I want to go and take pictures of insects, sunny days, not a lot of wind. And you will find more insects than you could possibly imagine. Mammals. These are the ones you have to just start taking pictures. Don't think about how hey is that? No, just start taking pictures. Shoot first, ask questions later. And again, change your perspective. Now these are the mammals are going to be the ones that are going to take off really as soon as they see you. So this is where having the sit spot with the blind, you're just going to be there anyway, they're going to start coming out. If you're up and moving around a lot, it's not going to happen. And then you have to know a little bit about behavior. I know that when my apple tree gets apples, that my little thief is going to start stealing them. And, squirrels are going to use any perches that a bird is going to use. So I kind of just wait it out, and I see it up in a tree, and then that's kind of like my focus for a bit, and I'm waiting because I know that undoubtedly it's going to try and first take apples that are 10 times its weight, that it's never going to be able to carry, but eventually it will find a little one, and it'll do something cute with it. And so, there's videos of it eating all that kind of stuff. And, for this mouse, what I thought was really interesting, it kept going and biting the back of the flowers for the nectar. And so I was watching it a little bit, and I realized that it was only doing to this specific annual that I had. So I set myself up so that I had a better view of that plant, and I waited and waited and waited, and eventually it came and worked on the plant where I had the best view of it. So mammals take a lot of patience, and it's also going to be like kind of one of the least visitors to your yard. So you just have to do the best you can, but if you've got your focus settings on right, you've got your continual autofocus, you have an idea of how to get that stability, then your shot is going to be better than without those things in mind.
What was at the top right?
Oh, that is a short-tailed weasel. So I've had two kinds of weasels in my yard, short-tailed weasel, and I've also had least weasel. So, yeah, they don't like their picture taken. So, I mean, it's the best I'm going to get. Do I wish that chair leg didn't exist? You betcha. I have been so mad at obstructions before where I have, angrily gone and cut a flower head off that was blocking a view. But it happens. I do keep some, shears ready because plants grow and they get in the way. Birds. So, again, when I went out and it was a brown thrasher, not a hummingbird, I didn't sit there and be like, well, golly gee, look at that. No, I was taking pictures, I was trying different things, I took a million pictures because I didn't know how long it was going to stay. And so birds, you really just have to start shooting because sometimes, and this has happened to me before, where you're like, oh, it's just a chickadee. I know we're terrible, just a chickadee, the cutest bird to ever exist, but we're like, oh, it's just a chickadee. Take a picture anyway. Because I've looked back at carols and then thought after a whole day of yellow-rumped warblers, I thought it was another yellow-rumped warbler. And I just literally took one picture of it and I looked later. It was actually the weirdest Cape-May warbler in having the weirdest molt. So little surprises can really sneak in that you don't even notice at first. So take lots of pictures, shoot first, ask questions later. This is where the sit spot really, really comes in handy. And so using a blind, we'll let them come in closer, just kind of how we've been before. Now, if you're sitting there waiting and you're got music playing, you're talking on your phone, they'll come, some of them, not super close, they might not stay, right? And so since where I sit is close to the alley, what can happen sometimes is if a car drives past behind me fast, it's going to do two things. It's going to make the bird land in front of me now, or it's going to make the bird leave, and I never know what's going to happen. So you kind of just have to be ready and hope always for the best. But we can do some things to set the scene, and this is what I do a lot of in my yard. Because I'm used to taking pictures of people where I'm expected to have an interesting backdrop, I've kind of applied that to birds, and really that is with perches. to the extent that there's an entire chapter on in my book about perches and snags, because they are so important, not just for photography, but for birds actually being comfortable in your yard. They hunt from them, they sing from them, they find insects on them, they groom themselves on them, they wipe their beaks off after drinking on them. So you're doing the birds a favor, and then you're getting a little bit of the reward. So when you're putting perches out, different kind of perches are going to be attracted to different kind of birds. So you can imagine how skinny that twig with that little hummingbird on. It's pretty small. I mean, warblers will land on this, chickadees and nuthatches and whatever, but also, you know, I'm not gonna have a Northern flicker landing on it. So then I have different, and then, you know, I try and pick up some branches that have, you know, interesting lichen on it, maybe, you know, some knots, interesting things on it, that, you know, curve a different way. But if you're going to have a very upright perch, that is woodpecker and brown creeper. They love that. But if you want birds to sit for a pretty photo, you need to have something that's going to bend a little bit so that they can sit evenly for you, and that's going to allow you to get a better look at them from different angles. So when I'm setting up perches, there's lots of different ways that I do that in my yard, but on the deck, like these two, they're just stuck in plant pots. So I have a pot with soil in it ready to be planted, and I put the twig in it. What I put in the pot with the twig, where I expect and hope a bird is going to land, is going to vary a little bit. So this one you can see is kind of an unobstructed background. I do have some pots that don't have anything else in them. They're just there, just for this purpose. But I have other photos where I really like to have some color. And this is where the flowers would come in, the grasses would come in. And so I wouldn't compose a pot all the same. You know, I think typically, like when they're selling like annual planters and stuff, and I'm talking about annuals here because it's on my deck, they'll be like, you know, the Thriller, Spiller, Focal Point, whatever. That can get a little bit busy. So what you want to do is start with your perch and then work around it, because where your flowers are is going to make a big difference of how your photos turn out. So if you can see the northern water thrush on the side, you see how there's like a little bit of a blur of color kind of going across its body. And now that was because there was a flower that was a little bit in front of it. So my spot focus is focusing on the bird and ignoring the flower. But it's still picking up at least those colors and those shapes around it, right? In the case of the rufous hummingbird, this one was actually what I call like more like my shoot-through setup. So it's actually very full. And this is the one I have to keep shears handy because I have to keep trimming. So in this case, the flowers were on either side and front. So I'm shooting through the front flowers to get that blurred, colorful effect. And then the flowers that are behind it, because I was a bit more zoomed in, it's only focusing on that rufous hummingbird now. There were some flowers just like inside the pot behind it. This is where, especially having a variety of colors and textures, is really going to make your flowers pop a bit more. So of course, would you set up this fantastic perch in the full shade? Probably not, because it's going to be harder for you to get that photo. Are you going to set it up at a distance where your camera and lens setup is difficult to get the picture? Also no. You want to set it up starting with what's going to be most successful for your situation. And now the thing about color, I have to actually see what I put on the next slide. Oh yes, distance, okay, good. So now this alder flycatcher, so this is a different way to figure this out. So if you've got a perch, which can also be flowers themselves, so anything with a thick upright stem is absolutely going to be something that birds want to perch on. So this is some cardinal flower that is on above a water feature. So the cardinal flower is actually growing out of a container pond. So you want to set up your perches places where the birds want to go anyway. So if this is near water, near food, resources, then they're going to be more likely to use your perch. So as you can see, there's the alder flycatcher on the cardinal flower, but there's a bit more cardinal flower about this far away. So because it's not slightly in front, that's why it doesn't have that nice creamy blur. So because it's over here, it's mostly in focus. So I actually decided for the final photo to crop it out because I found it was a little bit distracting. You can see a little bit more, almost like if you're a gardener, you might be able to guess what the flowers are behind, because those flowers are kind of close to the bird. But I actually had a lot of space in the photo, so that's why they're not as blurry as the rufous hummingbird. So when the flowers are behind it, it depends on what you want. If they're close, they're going to be more in focus, almost completely in focus, just a little bit blurry. If they're farther back, it's just going to be blurry color. So it's what you're looking for. Have some, a few different pots and try some different setups. And my pots always evolve because especially if one's really popular, it might start looking the same by August. And I'm ready for something new. So we've got Western wood pewee and we've got olive-sided flycatcher. So I actually get this question a lot. And the really interesting thing about photography is if you were doing like studio headshots and you were using a white background, okay? And so say this is my white background and I'm having my photo taken. If I'm about here, the background is going to look pretty white. And if I get farther away from it, it's now going to be a little bit more gray. If I stood over there and I had a big room with a white background, it would be black. So you could actually take that and is there any guess of what is making my background so dark? Distance and a spruce tree. So I also have things with unobstructed backgrounds that I can shoot through that has nothing for quite a while. And that's what gives, and the difference between these two perches that are almost in exactly the same spot was the light at that time of day. So that's all. And so the olive-sided flycatcher, it was really, really bright, so I was able to lower that exposure quite a bit, and that did drop down the background color as well, where it was a little bit cloudier on the day for the Western wood pewee. And then sometimes if you're just picking like something out of the photo to brighten, it can look a little unnatural, so I just left it as is. But there's a lot that you can play with. So you also can use what's there. So if you've got some dead branches on a shrub or a tree, within reason of course, leave some of them, especially if they're near the front where it would be a good spot for a photo because they love to use those little perches, hummingbirds, warblers, northern saw-whet owls, they love to use those natural perches that are there anyway. Now these are ones that are going to be a little bit farther away from me. And so it's going to be framing it a little bit different. When it's the saw-whet owl, that is me getting up out of my chair. But if you trimmed away all those branches, where are they going to land? They're going to land in the leaves. And then you're not going to get a very good picture of them because it's going to be too obstructed. All right, so if you want them to come to you, if you want them to let you take their picture, you have to give them something in return. So for me, it's having a garden, and especially with native plants. So this, again, I get a ton of black meadowhawks, is on some native giant hyssop. So when you have the plants that they want, they will come. You'll get more photo opportunities. So this one is a very popular plant with all insects. And the great thing is that the way that the plant is shaped, you can have insects that are landing on the sides, which is a really interesting picture, or on the very top, like this dragonfly. So if you are planting your garden, put things in it that are going to attract the things that you want to take photos of, which is insects, birds, and mammals. They all benefit from native plants. Landing pads. So as far as annuals go, when you have a flower that opens up nice and wide like this, it's a butterfly's dream. The same thing if it was like a flower that had a cluster of really tiny flowers like yarrow would be, the same. It gives them a nice big open spot to land on. And that's the easiest way to get a full photo of a butterfly. If you have some of the bushier flowers that don't kind of grow single like that, it's they kind of tend to hide inside of it. I usually take a lot of photos, and this one I think is Aphrodite, fertility, or Atlantis. What do you think?
Aphrodite.
Aphrodite? Oh, hi, Pony. Yeah, I think it's Aphrodite. So, if you don't have too much stuff in every single spot, you can get some more like portrait style insect photos, especially the butterflies, using a long lens because they don't want you. They don't like you. They just want your stuff and leave. Squirrels will use anything that's not theirs. Even if you put a sign on it that says that's not yours, they will go there more often. But they will definitely use everything you put out for birds, and let them. There's going to be some really cute photos. And there's the thing about is knowing like kind of what mammals might come to you. I'm a bit limited where I am, so I've had the weasels. They've really stayed in the shadows, really hard to get a photo of. The coyotes are generally in the front yard. The skunks are tricky because they really don't want to be around people, so they're gone in an instant. So that one is like, every mammal has a big challenge. I would say that probably that might show up in a yard that's the easiest besides a red squirrel is going to be a porcupine, because they're a little bit slower moving, right? And but I don't get porcupines. So, I need some trees that overhang for them to climb over and get into other, but it hasn't happened yet. Maybe someday. But sizes and shapes. If every single perch you get looks the same, all of your photos are going to look the same. So try and get some variety in there. Sizes, shapes, textures, species of wood that once was. And then when you start doing this, you end up creating your own photography studio in your yard. And with lots of different places. And I can't tell you how much time I sit on that little path in between those flowers just waiting for insects. The reason that I planted even on the left was to densify that area that used to just be open grass, because there's ground level bird baths on the right, and so there was much more activity after I added that extra density, because there was more places for the birds to hide, more places for them to sit and wait and see if it was safe before continuing on to the bird bath or up to some of my perches. So there's, so many ways that you can create these photo opportunities. And when you have them, they will use them. That's kind of the great part. It's like birds perch. Mammals do cool things. Insects are so busy that they'll let you take 1,000 pictures of them. But of course, if you're going to build a whole photography studio, you need more clients, or else your studio will fail. And that's why I wrote my book. Because I know that people were really excited about the birds and the animals and the insects that I was getting. And it was time, because I was doing talks like this, but this is such a fraction of the information, and it wasn't really specific, and it didn't have step-by-step instructions. And I really do think that any yard in Edmonton can greatly increase especially its bird activity. And that's not just a selfish endeavor, because if they're using your yard, that means you're giving them the resources that they need. And they so desperately need us now. And whether it's going to be a migrant that's just had a long journey and they have to stop and they have to refresh, your yard's going to provide that for them. Or it's going to be your local nuthatches, woodpeckers, chickadees that are going to be nesting in your yard, living in your yard year-round, finding shelter in your garden when it's cold, when it's hot, relief at your bird bath or your pond. These are the things that when we're kind of just reaping the benefits of giving them what they need and what's so lacking, especially in an urban environment. And so that is the end of my slides, but I'm happy to answer every single question. Can I just rudely point
What's our
people?
time, Rick?
Oh, yes.
It's 8:22.
Okay.
About another 10 minutes of questions.
Okay, sure. So if someone has a question, just put your hand and I'll point at you rudely. Yes?
Just a quick question. you mentioned about the monopod. Do you use a tripod as well? Or
So a tripod is a little bit more cumbersome because you're going to, if you don't have level ground in your yard, you have to adjust the legs. And you can't sit in a chair very comfortably with a tripod. So I use a tripod for studio photography, but for birds, insects, mounts, it's monopod all the way.
It's all okay.
Yeah. Counseling counts. Yes.
So what kind of chair was that?
Oh, so it's an egg chair, you know, like, so it's got like rattan on the top, like that's weaved around, and I love those kind of chairs. I've had them for years on the deck, so I was a little bit sad because I've been sitting in that chair for years looking at, you know, what's happening in my yard. But then when I saw this one, and I mean, it was Amazon, it arrived damaged. I called in my squeaky little voice and demanded compensation, which I got, and then I was okay with it. But I think that when my dog is like a little bit more, less like glue, then I'll probably then move my original egg chair back into the spot. But they are really comfortable, and you can shop around. And I would just say, if there's any little flaw, fight for your right.
Are you regularly feeding the birds in your yard?
Yes and no. So I really focus on my cavity nesters, which are going to be the chickadees, nuthatches, and woodpeckers. Because where I am in the city, I think it's like the last 2 years of the Christmas bird count, I've had the highest house sparrow count in the city. And so if I put out anything that that's a liberal feed, it's all house sparrows. And then if I have a huge population of house sparrows, they scare away the other birds. They prevent my cavity nesters from nesting successfully. So I really dial it back. And so I happily feed my cavity nesters. It's something that I've really been working on for years because of the population of house sparrows in my neighborhood. So I do have a bunch of tweaks to bird feeders in my book of what I've done so that makes it like a non-house sparrow feeder, even if it's one that typically they'd be able to access. So that's been a lot of experimenting. Yes?
What are all the cameras you've had?
What are all the cameras I have? Okay, so we're going like way back for some of them, which would be some like super old Canons. And then so when I started doing photos of birds, it was because the first disc I slipped in my lower back and I couldn't walk for a week, so I was laid out on my couch. And so I was watching all these YouTube videos about photography, and I got up inspired. I was like, oh yeah, I can walk. And then so I went from a D7200 eventually to the D500, and then I went and took a bunch of courses at McEwen. And because I was doing some volunteer photography for some of my kids' stuff, but they were paying some people, and I was like, my photos are better. And then so I wanted to have some clout behind that, so I went and took a bunch of courses, and then I was like, oh no, I want to do this too. And if they're charging, why can't I charge? And so then it kind of spun from that, and then I moved to D850, which I still love, and but now I have 2 Z8s. Because when I'm working, I have to double fist. Oh yes, it's Z. Z, Z.
No, we're saying, you said Z, so that's the mirrorless then?
Yes, that is a mirrorless. The reason I like that camera so much is there are some different versions. Now, keep in mind, this is my work camera that I also use for birds. There's also the the Z7. The Z6 just had a bunch of updates. I like Nikon because we get firmware updates regularly that improve the camera without having to go buy a new camera. So I'm quite on board with that philosophy. And I've shot Nikon for a long time, and once you get used to a menu in a camera, then it becomes much more second nature. But definitely going from a DSLR to a mirrorless camera, even though it was the same company, it was a jump. I had to spend quite a bit of time getting fast again, because the buttons moved and I'd be at work and why isn't it there? So yeah, but you know, it's a learning curve for everything, but it's practice. I think that's what people, like if you go out sometimes and shoot, birds or wildlife, if you want to be fast, shoot more, shoot anything, and you will get to that auto speed that's going to allow you to react in uncomfortable situations. And birds put us in uncomfortable situations. My clients put it in uncomfortable situations. I've shot in some really dark spots, and I can't leave and say, I'm sorry, you'll have to pay me, but I could only get 3 photos because it was too dark. No, I can't. I have to be able to deliver. And, it's hard, but that has shown me some of the things that, that I've been able to squeeze into this presentation that has really transferred to wildlife.
Where is your book available?
You can buy it from me here. I brought some copies, and I've got like this new gadget. It's a little square K thing, so you can tap or put it in, but I think I have maybe 10 copies left that I brought with me. If not, tonight it's at Audrey's, it's at Wild Birds Unlimited, it's at Wild Bird General Store, it's at Apache Seeds, and then it's also in Calgary and Saskatoon. Oops. Yes?
Do you have a likeness to the birds you've seen in your garden?
Yes, absolutely. So after this year, I'm sitting at 111 species for my yard. I had 83 species visit in 2025. 2024 was 84 species. But something kind of happened in November. There was what I thought was a northern water thrush. I had just dug a new front yard pond. I do this in October every year. I get really squirrely, and I'm like, the ground's gonna freeze. I must do a project. And so I dug this little front yard, kind of mini hidden pond, and it was -3, November something, and a northern water thrush came to it. And I was like, what? That's definitely my latest warbler ever, because I do keep track of who's my latest warbler every year. And I put it out on my Instagram, and then I started getting a little bit of rumblings that some people think it might be the first record of a Louisiana water thrush. So there's people looking at it. I don't know if they'll be able to say concretely from a video, but I still just think it's great that the warbler showed up that late, so we'll wait and see. But yes, I do keep track very diligently. I have spreadsheets every day of the year. No?